Good evening. Can you hear me? How's everybody? Good? You have enough sugar from the cake? I'm going to speak at the invitation of Karen Kiefer. So thank you, Karen, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. A lot of my friends have done this. I did it in a previous life in 2011. And I really enjoy the contact on a non-academic setting to talk about things that are important. I do want to warn you a little bit in advance that a few of the things I allude to might be difficult for some of you to hear. It's kind of a semi-trigger warning. I'm not going to go into any details, but some of what I'm going to talk about is a little bit difficult. But I want to start off with two quotations from music that was released in 2018. It's a long time ago for you guys, but not long for me. The first is a song by Mumford & Sons called Guiding Light. And it's a beautiful song. You probably all heard it. And it opens up, but early in the song says, "But don't just sit there with folded hands and become blind. Because even when there is no star in sight, you'll always be my guiding light." This song is the singer's lament about the absence of God. The Mumfords have a really, I think, a pretty profound musical agenda. And he's singing this as a lament that I need your light and I don't see it, but I can trust it. So the theme of light's really important to what I want to talk about. The second is from Lady Gaga. You probably all heard the song, "Always Remember Us This Way." And there's a line in there I've always loved where she says, "You found the light in me that I couldn't find." Now, it's easy for Bradley Cooper to do that. But I think we can all do it. And I don't think it just has to do with romantic love. It has to do with seeing the light in each other, being the light for each other, no matter how much darkness there is. We can be the light for each other. And that's kind of a statement I have as a statement of faith. But it's also a statement of hope. Because we're in December, I was trying to weave in somehow a reference to Christmas, to the coming. We're in Advent now, and what does Christmas mean besides presents and parties and football games? Happy or not. And I want to start off with the famous line from the Gospel of John. It's one of my favorite lines. In the very beginning of the Gospel of John, the author is rewriting the book of Genesis as all preparing for the coming of Christ. So we have this opening. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him. And the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. That's a profound thought. The darkness does not overcome it. Because we're living in a time where we're very clear that there's a lot of darkness in the world. Polarization, violence, crime, sexual assault, you name it. It can feel overwhelming. So how do we keep going when life is hard? Not only a geopolitical big picture, but in our own lives with stress and anxiety and just life's hitting us sometimes so hard we feel like we're in a hole. And how do we learn how to deal with that? How do we find light when we're in the hole of a well? And I want to say that we get light through each other. That we are there to be light to each other. And that goes to my last quotation here from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, which is on the poster, notorious poster that was going around campus. where Jesus says to the disciples, "You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on the lampstand it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others. Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and be grateful to God, your Father." So those questions you have, the musicians talking about someone being a light in their lives, and you have the Bible talking about God wanting to be present with us as light. And so I want to talk a little bit about who has been light in my life. I've had an incredible series of really profoundly good people in my life, for which I'm very, very grateful every day of my life. And I'd never hope I take them for granted. I think we all tend to do that. But the reason I'm so grateful is that I think they have been a profound light for me. When I was a little kid, I'm talking 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, I was hell on wheels. I was fighting at school. I was lighting fires. I was vandalizing. At 10, I had a friend, we used to do breaking and entering. And we'd mess with somebody's living room and leave just to mess with them. We ate cereal just to leave the cereal bowls there to freak them out. When they came back, who had cereal? I don't know. They could have at least put the dishes away. But I was a very angry little kid. I got kicked out of 4th grade, where I was on probation already for acting up, and I was on the playground, and a kid, you know how you always get the retaliator, never the one that initiates it? So this kid been provoking me, and I tripped him, and I called him a word that rhymes with trucker, and the nun was right behind me. So I was busted. She got very angry at me, and I was already on double secret probation, and so I got the old ruler on the rear, spanking, and then I called her another bad word that rhymes with lore that has a W in it. And this is 4th grade. And then she washed my mouth out of soap with that grain powder you used to scour pans with, which I guess could kill you if it gets in your system. She didn't know, I hope. No, she was trying to kill me, which I would have understood at the time. So I got kicked out of 4th grade, and I got kicked out of 5th grade for fighting. I sort of got set up because they had heard that I was a bad kid. And so the first day in class, the teacher has me stand in front of the whole classroom. I hadn't said a word to her, but I did one little thing. I chewed on a girl's pencil that I borrowed to fill out a test. I was nervous, and I chewed on the pencil, and then the teacher accused me of being a little vandal or something. So I had to stand in front of the class, and she said to the whole class, "See, whatever this boy does, you do the opposite, and you'll be good." So now I was a man with nothing to lose. And that teacher, about a month later, early in the school year, I started doing things that would annoy her. And I was very good at punching people's buttons. And she reacted over and over again. She just kept saying bad stuff and mean stuff to me. So I finally went outside. I knew which car she had. It was a pink car with big fins on it. And I let all the air out of her tires. All 4 tires. And the psycho thing was I sat on a bench out in front of the car to watch her cry. This is 5th grade. Now my wife, who's a social worker, says there's a list of 10 things that predict criminal incarceration for long-term antisocial behavior. She said I actually hit 8 of the 10. So then I went to 6th grade at a fancy school with horses and big fences, and it was supposed to be state-of-the-art psychology, but I messed with them too. I broke a kid's ribs fighting, and I got expelled from that school. Then I went to my 4th school in 4 years, a very good Catholic school, and I was like, this was like the last-ditch effort. Next thing is Devil's Island. They were saying if I keep going, I'm going to be in juvenile hall. But I ran into this nun, Sister Catherine, she seemed like she was about 6'5". She was probably 5'10". I was little. And what was remarkable about Sister Catherine, when I went in to meet her, my grandfather was there, and he said, you know, Stephen's had a kind of rocky past. And she looked down at me and smiled very kindly and said, Stephen and I are going to get along just fine. And that was kind of ominous to me, because I didn't get along with any teacher just fine. I usually want to set their hair on fire after they've been with me for a while. But Sister Catherine had no buttons for me to push. No matter what I did, I would write notes. Does Sister Catherine shave her legs? And I would crumple them up and I'd put them in the garbage can, hoping she would fish it out to get intel on the students. I saw her do it because I was in detention every day. But it never bothered her. She never took it personally. And I think she was the first person outside my family to really to love me without any strings attached, without any manipulation, without any question. No matter what I did, she was loving, she was affirming, and she was consistent. And my grandfather, who was the other person I want to talk about, along with another later teacher, my grandfather was so impressed with how much I turned it around in 7th grade because of Sister Catherine. Because I started studying a little more, which was before nothing. Studied a little bit more, got more interested in school, got better at it. And when I later went on to get my PhD, my grandfather bought a case of champagne and took it to the convent to give to Sister Catherine and the nuns that were there in that community. They also embodied for me a kind of service that was steady and faithful and never putting yourself forward, just always there, always ready to care for kids. So that really had a huge impact on me. The two other people I want to mention, one is my grandfather, who was a colonel in the U.S. Army. He retired in 1954, and I was born in 1955. And his son had died around 7, 8, 9 years old. Their 6th child had brain cancer, and he died. And I came along, and in a lot of ways, I think I didn't replace Teddy, which is his name, but I was somebody who my grandfather, now retired, could really pour his love onto. So he taught me how to play golf, how to play catch, how to drive a car. His method of driving a car was take me to a desert and give me the car keys and say, see what you can do. It was amazing. And I was 15, I guess, at the time. So my grandfather was another person, no matter what I did, I could not piss him off. And that pissed me off, because he's an authority figure, and I was constantly rebelling against authority figures. I set his car on fire with my sisters in it. We were all in the back seat, and I was showing how you could flick a match, and it goes like this, and it looks like, flaming arrows going into the fort, only it hit the cushion and then went poof. It's amazing that stuff was flammable. So, but he comes out of the bank, and there we are out in the street, and there's a fire truck putting flames out. He never said anything to me. He knew it wasn't going to do any good. He knew something was disturbed in me. Something was angry. Something was hurting. Kids don't just act like that for no reason, right? But he was steady in love. And one of the things I remember him telling me when I was a little kid, maybe I was 5 or 6 years old, and he said, no matter what you do, God always loves you and forgives you. Which is an amazing thing to hear, because I was doing a lot of stuff that I needed to be forgiven for. But that message has always stuck with me. I'm teaching a course right now on forgiveness, and I think it goes back to that deep conviction of God forgives us. So the third person I want to talk about was a college professor of mine. And I went from St. Leo's, I got into Jesuit high school, Bellarmine in San Jose. It was great for me. I had a lot of wonderful young Jesuits there. There were mentors and models for me. But I was really lost. And the reason I was lost is that both of my parents were alcoholics. And many of you, I'm sure, have a parent that's an alcoholic. And you know the chaos that can cause. You know the hurt it can cause. You know, alcoholism is a mask for emotional pain that people don't know how to deal with, so they drink. It's an escape. It's a temporary anesthetic that actually makes your life a lot worse. And when you have kids that are the kids of parents that are alcoholic are often abused, and I was abused. Physically, not sexually, but physically and emotionally abused. And I don't want to go into the details, but that's the reason I was a kid really angry at school. That's why I was fighting. That's why I would go up to the playground in 6th grade and find the biggest kid I could and punch him in the face. I didn't care if I got hurt. I cared a lot more that I was so angry I had to hit out and strike out. So I went to college, really lost. I wanted to go to UC Santa Barbara because they had surfboard racks and dorms on the beach. My parents wisely said, no, you're not doing that. And then I went to Gonzaga where there's no beach and no surfboards, and it's cold like it is here. And at Gonzaga, my first 2 years, I was a disaster, honestly. My sophomore year, I had a 1.6 GPA. And that's because most of what I was studying had to do with the rugby team and pool. I was drinking a lot because I didn't know what the point of college was. I didn't understand why you do this. Everyone says, well, that's the next stage. Keep going to school. Don't leave school. So I was going through the motions, and I'm sure a lot of you, either yourselves or you have friends that just go through the motions. You don't see the point. It seems like a big game. And a boring big game. But I came in second semester sophomore year to a professor of German literature and poetry. He had been a veteran of World War II. At the age of 15 in 1944, he was drafted into the German army, and he was put on an anti-aircraft battery shooting down Russian jets or Russian planes. He went AWOL from the German army, came to the U.S., got his PhD in English, and then I had him in my sophomore poetry class. But from the minute I walked into the class, this guy struck me as somebody who was real. And when he talked about poetry, when he read Keats or Eliot or Wordsworth, Dante was one of his favorites. The whole class was spellbound because he could make something that's 700 years old seem like he was speaking to us right now. And Franz Schneider took a liking to me. I used to go visit him at his office hours. He lived about 6 blocks from campus. He invited me to his house for coffee. On Fridays, he would actually, I was underage, and he would take us to a bar and we'd drink beer and talk about poetry. And if you're going to talk about poetry, there's no better way to do it than drinking beer. Because you can just get into the meaning of the poetry. And Franz Schneider treated us as if it's important that we understand. He saw the light in us. And that's what I really want to communicate to you, is that Sister Catherine and my grandfather and Franz Schneider all saw the light in me that I couldn't see. But because of Franz Schneider, I went home and I decided, back to my dorm room, now I'm on probation. I tell my roommate, I know what I'm going to do the rest of my life. I want to be a college professor. He almost fell out of his chair. He said, Pope, you're insane. You're 1D from flunking out of this place. You're going to be a professor? What have you been smoking? What have you been eating? Something's wrong here. And he was both amused and scornful. And I understand why, because my track record didn't give any indications. But what I knew, what I felt in his class was, for the first time in my life, for the very first time in my life, I discovered that truth illumines the mind and illumines the heart. And that's the beauty of poetry, because it speaks both to the head and to the heart. So Schneider so inspired me that my grades went from a 1.6 first semester sophomore year to a 3.8 first semester junior year. And then I just took off. And I understood how all the different parts of knowledge go together. And Schneider is really my model of what I want to be as a college professor. Somebody who's real, who takes students seriously, who realizes that we all need to be light for each other, that we realize that life is really hard. But we can make it a little bit easier if we recognize we're being light to each other as we go through these difficulties of life. I think probably now it's even harder to get to that reality because so much of our society and so much of academics is now performance. It's what you look like. It's how you show yourself. It's what your public image is. It's what your resume is. It's what your transcripts will look like. None of that is you. None of that is who you really are, which is a good and beautiful person whose whole meaning is to be a light to one another. And I think what we realize is we see our light in seeing the light of others. It's not like that we have all the answers and here I'm going to give you the light at all. It's that our light kind of gets activated in loving other people. So I think at the end of the day, and I'll stop here, and if you have any comments or questions, I'd love to have them. But if at the end of the day, my life lesson from having gone through a really hard time growing up and then being loved into sanity is that what we all need to do is love each other into sanity. St. Augustine has a beautiful line where he says, you only really know the people you love. You only really know the people you love. So that the challenge of the light is how do I become more loving and therefore know people better? And when you know people better, you start to bring out the best in them and they bring out the best in you. It's a beautiful synergy of love, recognition, acknowledgement. But to do that, my last point, to do that, I think we have to be honest with each other. We have to give up the idea that everything has to be perfect. We have to give up the idea that the main point of life is to give a good public image. We have to really strive to be engaged in living an authentic life, which is fundamentally a life with two traits, honesty and compassion. And that's what Franz Schneider taught me, Sister Catherine taught me, and my grandfather taught me. So thank you very much for your attention. I really would like to have questions or comments if you have them.